is Phreaking for Fun and Profit, how we pwned the phone. If this is not the talk you're looking for, tough, you have to sit through it. Didn't even wait to go on, not really. So who am I? My name is Brad Swanson. You can find me on Twitter as Digital Templar. You can email me if you like. I'm the manager of threat intelligence and response for a SaaS provider out of San Francisco. About 25, 26, 27-ish years doing digital security. Not all of it was deemed digital security. Back in the old days, it was just doing computer work. When I was a kid, I had a very large recreational interest in how phone systems worked. It was very neat to go exploring the phone systems and find out what things we could make them do. When I'm not busy computering, I'm bombing around in my Jeep out in the desert outside of Las Vegas where I live. I love social engineering, one of my favorite things to do. I also like red teaming and romantic walks on the beach while sniffing Wi-Fi. So the standard disclaimer, these are my experiences, my opinions, my input, my thoughts. In no way does this reflect the thoughts, opinions of my employer. Most of my employee here doesn't even really know that I'm here today, so awesome. And then a couple of just simple warnings. So yeah, sold by weight, not volume, don't inhale the fumes, etc. So we're going to cover a couple of things today. We're going to talk about how the phone system works, and this is going to be at a very high level. We're not going to get into a lot of the super technical details because that's really not the point of this talk. It's just kind of give a little background on how it works so that folks understand some of the other things. We're going to talk about types of boxes, which requires a little bit of an understanding on how the phone system worked and how some of those exploits were able to be leveraged. We're also going to talk about some famous people that used to phreak. Why did they phreak? How did they phreak? What was their reasoning behind it? And then we'll cover a couple of interesting numbers. There's still some neat numbers you can use for things that still work today, even though a lot of the boxes and things no longer work. And if we have time at the very end, I'll go through a couple of entertaining stories about some interesting numbers and some interesting experiences in the past. So let's start with the phone system and how that works. So the older phone system ran what was called SS5, signaling system 5. It used what's called in-band signaling. So that means that the control tones for the phone system went down the same channel as your voice. Well, that's good. The phreakers were super happy about that because it's very easy now to send these control signals right through the mouthpiece. You don't have to do any crazy hijinks to get those signals into the band. You just play it in the mouthpiece and off they go. SS5 was designed to work with intercontinental traffic. This was back in the early days of satellite, the suboceanic cables, and so SS5 was designed for that, and it used what's called MF tones, multi-frequency tones. So when you dial a telephone, you hear multi-frequency, like sounds like a regular touch-tone phone. These are different multi-frequency tones that the phone system used for signaling. The reason they use different multi-frequency tones is they didn't want anybody with a touch-tone phone to be able to start hacking the phone system. They wanted you to go through some effort. So then after SS5 started getting just pwned all over the place, they said we need to fix this. We need to come out with something better, something more robust, something much more secure. They moved to signaling system 7. There was a 6 in between, but it was pretty short-lived. 7 is the big one. You still find a lot of systems running SS7 now. And the big change with SS7 is they took that in-band signaling away. They took all the control frequencies, all these MF frequencies, and they put them in a separate channel. So now you can't just send tones through the mouthpiece and go interesting places. Now it's a lot harder to do this phreaking. None of the boxes worked anymore. People that phreaked were not happy about it. It made them sad. It came out around 1980. It did not roll out right away. You hear talks of a lot of people. I was able to box calls. I lived in a small town in Illinois, had a small local phone company. We were able to box calls until 1986. So yeah, it took them a long time to roll it out. We'll talk about why it took so long in a minute here. SS7 has a very, very large vulnerability. It has a couple of vulnerabilities. But one of the big ones, with SS7, you can track a cell phone user with 70% accuracy. And not only can you track their location with SS7, you can also intercept and decrypt phone calls. So if you're running 4G and it's running encryption, Doesn't matter with SS7, you can decrypt that communication. And people have actually used that. There was a case in 2017 in Germany where criminals used this vulnerability to bypass two-factor. And they stole money from people's bank accounts. So people would be like, I want to make this transaction in my bank. The bank would put a two-factor to their phone via SMS. Folks would intercept that using this SS7 vulnerability. So this is an addition. This is different than, like, you may have heard of SIM hijacking. This is yet another way that people were intercepting two-factor. And it was bad. And they kind of knew it was an issue, but they didn't fix it right away. And no one's going to find that. Well, people found it, and they leveraged it. So just another reason why SMS is really a bad idea for your two-factor stuff. Use a third-party app or whatever, but SMS is not a good way to go. As I mentioned, it wasn't rolled out as quickly as people had hoped it would be, as the telco hoped it would be. So phreakers rejoiced. People that like to explore the phone system were excited. We can keep doing this. This is coming. The end is near, but we can still play until the end comes. So why was it so slow to roll this out? It was slow to roll out. The cost was huge. I mean, it was extremely expensive. You had to replace all your switches. It was a great big infrastructure change, which cost money. There was also a court ruling that if you were a phone company and you provided service in two different LATAs, you had to have separate infrastructure in each LATA. So you're not buying one big SS7 system and using that everywhere. You're having to put one everywhere that you're doing business. So the cost exponentially increased based on that. There's a lot of effort with SS7. There are a lot of differences between SS5 to SS7. So before you can just roll it out and just drop it out there, you have to train your people on how it works, how to use it, how to roll it out. You have to make sure that they understand it before it goes out. So when there are problems, your linemen and your people working in the central office are able to fix that. And then you have the actual physical rollout of it. You have to take these SS5 switches out, put the SS7 switches in. So with SS7, we're going to roll out all these new switches, but we need to keep phone service up while we're doing this. We can't just say, okay, everybody, your phone's being turned off, and maybe they'll be back on next week when the new switches come in. It has to be a staged approach, so there's a lot of planning involved. And then there's the maintenance of it. You have to have spares, so there's more financial out cost for that. You need to make sure that, again, your linemen are trained on how to maintain this equipment. It's not roll it out, set it and forget it. You're going to need to make sure that it keeps working, because if phones go out, people freak out. If your cell service drops for an hour from Verizon, people are like torches and pitchforks, right? And then the need. Is there really a need to? So, phone companies have a finite budget, just like all of us have a finite budget where we work. If there's really not a big need, they're really not driven to spend that money and to get the SS7s rolled in. Where I lived in Central Illinois is a small phone company, small community. They didn't really need to roll it out. The SS5 worked fine. Why should we spend this money now? Let's wait until we absolutely have to roll this out. So then SS7 kind of is leading into the modern day, which is VoIP. A lot of companies are now using voice over IP, and people still phreak, but phreakers have become more hackers than phreakers. So basically, VoIP turns your handset into an endpoint, and it calls a server, and it routes your call over the internet to another VoIP server and off to Sarah's phone. So if there's servers involved, servers can be hacked. There's vulnerabilities, there's all kinds of, and it's the same issue you see with any server, whether it's a VoIP server, an exchange box, or what have you. In fact, there was a Melbourne-based VoIP company, rolled out VoIP servers, didn't patch them. There were some bad vulnerabilities that came out on these servers they didn't patch, and their servers got popped. Well, as soon as the servers get popped, the bad guys get on the dark web and share this information. There was a VoIP provider in Egypt, got a hold of these credentials for this company in Melbourne, started routing all their VoIP traffic through this company in Melbourne. The benefit to the Egyptian company, they're still charging their customers the same rate. It's going to cost you, $4 for this call, but they don't have to pay any VoIP fees because they're routing it off the Melbourne server's box. So the Melbourne server was still responsible for the bills because the bills always have to be paid. That's the thing in the phone company. That bill always has to be paid. They ended up racking up over $100,000 just the company in Egypt, not counting all the miscellaneous smaller people that are going in and taking advantage of this. And that company went out of business 6 months later because of this. There's another company that said, hey, we're not going to take chances. We're going to set up our own VoIP system. We're going to manage it ourselves. We're going to take care of it, and we'll know that it's secure. We'll make sure it gets patched. As soon as the patch comes out, we're going to patch it. We're not going to make the same mistake that Melbourne did, except one of their admins on that box reused a password, and that got popped. And they got hit for $25,000 for unauthorized calls. And they, again, had to pay it because phone companies want their money. If you've ever had erroneous charges on a phone bill and ever tried to get those removed, you know how hard it is to get the phone company to be like, okay, you don't have to pay that. Bills have to be paid regardless of who makes them. The phone company is going to come knocking for it. So modern day freaks are really computer hackers, more so than maybe the freaks of old that were more electronics geeks, sort of. So it's kind of a new era that we're going into with VoIP, and VoIP's just going to get bigger and bigger as we go. So it's going to continue to expand the hacking skill set, if you will, of the modern day folks. So so that's kind of an overview of how the phone system works at a super high level. The main thing to take away from that is SS5. SS5, freaks like it. So people started making these boxes to do crazy stuff on the phone system. Bell used to like to brag and toot their own horn. They had a thing called the Bell Technical Journal, and they would publish articles in it. Hey, this is how we're doing this. Look at how cool we are. We're awesome. Oh, look at what we figured out here. Let's publish an article on that. They released some technical specs on how the phone system signaling worked in a 1960 issue of this technical journal. All these engineering type and electronics type people back in the 60s got a hold of this, started reading it, and were like, well, they just gave us the keys to the kingdom right here. This explains how everything works. So you had a small group of people that were playing with the phone system and exploring, trying to find what happens if I do this? Where does that go? Esquire found out that there are people in this kind of underground little group doing this with the phone system. Esquire was like, we should do an article. Esquire was a gentleman's magazine that was around back then. I don't know if they're still around or not. They wrote an article, huge article, like pages and pages, and they interviewed all these famous phone freaks back in the day. And they said, hey, how does this work? Show us. And this reporter went and would hang out with these individuals, and they would take them out late at night and do things off pay phones, off home phones. They would show them the very nitty-gritty nuts and bolts of how this works. And this individual wrote an article, very detailed article, blanked out some names to protect folks, but that was it. So then everybody gets interested in phone freaking because it's in this national publication. So basically the way the Blue Box works, and the Blue Box was the main focus of this article. So if you blow a 2600 hertz tone into a phone, it will capture the trunk. And basically what it does is it tells whatever number you're calling, hey, I've hung up. So you just toot 2600 hertz, it releases the trunk, but as soon as you stop blowing that, you seize that trunk again. So now you have control of this trunk. They use 2600 hertz because it's not in a normal speech pattern. Like you wouldn't accidentally blow a 2600 hertz just talking to somebody on the phone. You blow 2600 hertz on a call, you make a call 50, 60, 70 miles away, so you get outside your ladder. You blow that 2600 hertz tone, the other end thinks you've hung up. When you call an 800 number, so it's not going to bill you. That 800 number thinks you've hung up, releases the trunk. Well, then you stop blowing it, you seize that trunk again, and now you can send a key press signal, KP, and a number, and then ST, which is start, and it dials that call. So you could call London, you could call China, you could call your neighbor next door, you could call another phone in your house, didn't matter. Freak said, okay, that's cool, but what can we do? Let's play with it, let's explore. We have this inquisitive mindset. We want to know what else we can do. How does it work? So they would start stacking trunks. They would say, okay, well, I can go from here to London, to Brisbane, to Kenya, to Canada, to South America, to New York City. The benefit of that, and the freaks did it just plain. They just wanted to see if they could do it. They didn't have an ulterior motive for it. You could call phone numbers. You could also dial special codes in the phone company. You could become a directory assistance operator. So somebody dials 555-1212, they don't get the operator, they get you. And then you just mess with them and have fun, you know. The other thing you could do is you could dial internal codes that would give you what's called the verification line. So in the old days, if you were trying to call somebody, like if I'm trying to call my coworker Brandon or Anna, and the line's busy for hours, I can have the operator break into that call and say, excuse me, if Brad's trying to make an emergency phone call, can you please clear the line? Those verification lines, you could just click into that and just listen and not say anything. So this is kind of a very, very, very early form combined with some other numbers at the phone company of doxing. You know, you could listen on a call, learn things about people. So it was pretty scary stuff for people to be able to do that. Again, you could stack trunks all around. Freaks did it just because it was fun and because it could, and it was cool to hear that echo. Like you could call yourself on another phone after stacking it several times. You can say, hello, and like 3 or 4 seconds later, you hear yourself on it, hello, and you can just talk to yourself back and forth. We're all kind of introverts, right? So who better to call than yourself? You know, talk to real humans that way. The Vegas syndicate found out about these blue boxes, and they said, wait a second, okay, there's potential for this. You can stack trunks, and you can bounce calls, and you can call an 800 number. My phone bill shows that I called an 800 number, but I'm really calling some other place. What better use for blue boxes than bookies? Bookies don't want the cops or anybody to know who they're calling. They want the feds to come in and raid them and get their phone records and say, oh, well, you know, they've called all these people. Let's go investigate all these people for illegal gambling. Let's let the laptop go to sleep. Sorry about that. Should have turned that off. I'm new at this, can you tell?
Password 1, 2, 3.
Who told you my password? So the Vegas crime syndicate said, we need some of these blue boxes. We want, when we get raided, we want to look like we called the time and temperature 800 number in Phoenix, and that's it. Let them go raid the Phoenix time and temperature place. Let's not have them raid our other bookies that we're calling or our other criminal associates. Let's also make it very hard for them to trace our phone calls. If I call from here to Madison and they start a trace, they've got it almost instantly. But if I take that call and I call London, and then I bounce that to Paris, and then to Tokyo, and then I'm down to Brisbane, and then I'm up to San Francisco, and then Madison, that's a lot harder for them to trace that because they're tracing each tandem that I've bounced that across. So the mob was like, we need these. They placed an order with a gentleman. He went by Al Gilbertson, but that's not his real name. He was making blue boxes and selling them for $1,500 a piece to people. In the late 60s, early 70s, that was a chunk of change for just a little electronic box. The mob comes to him and says, we want 1,000 of these. He's like, okay, I'll give it to you for 300 grand. You know, give me 300 bucks a piece, done. So he had that order. He doesn't ever say whether he actually delivered on that and got paid by them. That's kind of a question if that actually went through, but supposedly it did. So here we have some examples of blue boxes. The one on the far left, the large one, this is one of the earliest blue boxes. This is actually in a museum in, I believe, Sydney, Australia. And that's what it looked like. It was a keypad, had a couple of extra buttons on it for doing the 2600 hertz tone and for doing the key press and the start. And then a little mouthpiece that you just hold, or a little speaker, sorry, that you hold up to the mouthpiece of the phone. Blue boxes were illegal. They were very illegal. So people would disguise it. Here's a blue box disguised as a calculator. Had a little charging outlet, like old calculators, so you could plug in. So it had a charging jack on the top of the calculator. You'd plug your speaker into that. If the cops showed up, you unplug your speaker, you chuck it, and you've got your blue box. You know, oh no, it's just a calculator, officer. Cops like, have a nice day. See you, nerd. This is a new blue box. This is actually built off an Arduino. Now, blue boxes no longer work here or pretty much anywhere because of the new signal switch. I mean, you might be able to use it in some faraway place, but blue boxes really don't work anymore. It's just a project. It's more of a nostalgia thing. Somebody figured out how to make blue boxes using Arduino. You load some Arduino libraries, you load this keypad onto it, you go out to DigiKey, you buy some components, and you have a blue box. Again, it doesn't work, but it's cool just to have to play with and to talk about conversation piece. So that's blue box. Any questions on blue boxing? All right. So then there's a black box. A black box was used going the other direction. So blue boxes, you make calls out for free. A black box would allow incoming calls to be free. So at the phone company, there were two relays in the switch. One controlled billing and one controlled ringing. So I could call somebody up. They could use a black box, and what it would do is, normally when you pick up your phone, your line voltage when it's ringing drops from that 48 volt constant down to about 10 volts. And that's what trips those relays to say, okay, make the phone stop ringing, and let's start billing for this call. Because back then, everything was by minute. The phone company wanted their money. Using a couple of caps, a resistor, or a Zener diode, you can make this black box. It would hold that line voltage high enough where it would trip the relay to stop the ringing, so it wasn't driving you insane. You could pick up the phone and talk to the person. But it wasn't enough to trip that billing relay. So the billing relay would never trip. As far as the phone company thought, your phone was just ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing. And this is before the days where everybody had voicemail or answering machines. So it's common to have a phone ring 30, 40 times if you're trying to get a hold of somebody, so you could get a quick message back and forth pretty easily. It was one way, so it only worked if people called you. It wouldn't work if you called out. You'd still be billed normally. And these were actually created by an ex-Bell employee. His name was John Draper. He goes by Captain Crunch. He was the individual that figured out that these little toy whistles that you got in boxes of Captain Crunch in the late 60s would actually blow a 2600 hertz tone, which we talked about with the blue boxes. And it was, it sounds kind of loud, but it sounds like this. I'm right-handed. That's 2600 hertz. He figured out he could steal phone calls with that. We're going to talk a little bit more about John later. He's kind of a questionable individual because of some stuff. I'm not going to go into that today, I don't think. But yeah, so black boxes. Free calls in. Any questions on black boxes? Moving on. Red boxes. First and foremost, it is still illegal to possess a red box if you use it with nefarious intent, aka to defraud the phone company. Red boxes don't work anymore because of SS7, but it's still a law in the books, kind of like it's illegal to tie your horse outside the tavern on a Tuesday afternoon. 10 years in prison if you have a red box. They actually arrested somebody that worked for 2600 magazine in New York, Bernie S. His real name was Ed Cummings. He had a red box, didn't even work. That's what a red box looks like. So a red box lets you generate coin tones to a payphone, nickels, dimes, quarters, so the payphone thinks you're putting coins in when you're really not. You have to change the processing crystal out. So this is a Radio Shack pocket tone dialer. It comes with a 3.5 megahertz processor crystal. And so when you turn it on, you can store phone numbers in it, and it makes it easy because you can just dial a phone number. If you were to, and I would never possess an illegal red box because illegal red boxes are illegal. But if you were to take one of these and swap out that processing crystal and play 5 like asterisks with that new processing crystal, oh, I don't know how that happened. It must have been a glitch. It would generate a quarter tone to a payphone. So if you called Zimbabwe and they're like, please insert $12 for the first minute, you would just, technical difficulties. Never do live demos. Every time you do that, it's put a quarter in the payphone. So yeah, don't ever do that. Just make sure it's just asterisks. Never use a red box. Illegal. 10 years. Bernie had one. He didn't have he had the crystal. He hadn't soldered it in. He just had this and a crystal. It's like having a gun and a bullet, not in the gun, and they charge you for murder. He did 1.5 years in prison, federal prison. Got beat up pretty bad. He was doing strange things to the phone in prison, making some phone calls. And a larger, meaner inmate that was in there for far worse crimes than Bernie was came over, wanted to use the phone. Bernie's like, yeah, let me just wrap up real quick and you can have your phone. Apparently that wasn't good enough for the guy, so he proceeded to knock Bernie down and stomp his face in. Broke his face up pretty bad, busted his arm, he was in intensive care, blah, blah, blah. They were trying to make an example of Bernie. He released some pictures of some Secret Service agents. Secret Service was not pleased about that. So the Secret Service kind of threw the book at him and messed with him pretty good. But he finally got out and it's good to go. The Secret Service is actually the one that enforces this. So let's not worry about counterfeit money. Let's not worry about protecting the president. Let's go after a box that doesn't even work anymore because, that's where the threat is. So the quarter tone, nickels and dimes, They're a combination. Remember we talked about multi-frequency, 2 frequencies. So it's 1700 hertz and 2200 hertz. A nickel is 1, a dime is 2, and a quarter is 5. So you can see like a nickel, dime, quarter. You know, it's all based off nickels kind of. But, and they work really good. You had to be careful how you used it, so you didn't get popped by an operator. And there were times I got popped by an operator. Operator would come on. How much money did you actually put in? I'd be like, $12. And they'd be like, well, try putting in real money, not using your silly box. Or I'll call security and a bell truck's on the way. The nearest bell office is 200 miles north. Okay, you send them on down. I'll wait for them. So the telco had to find a way to combat that. So what they did is they started on like payphones. They would mute the mouthpiece until you put all your money in for the call, and then they would unmute that mouthpiece. So you couldn't hold this up to the phone and play the tones. People found ways around that as well. They'd cut into the wires coming out of the box and feed the tones in there. So yeah, so red boxes, super fun, no longer work, still illegal. Any questions about red boxes? Anybody has questions after the talk, feel free to track me down. I'll be at the Wisconsin Hacking History Village. Come see me. More than happy to talk about this stuff, let you play with it. Explain how this mysteriously makes weird tones randomly. Then we have the beige box. A beige box is basically, it's a butt set for people who can't afford a butt set or can't steal one out of a Southwestern bell truck. This one I bought off Amazon. So my old one, though, I don't know where that came from. It just appeared one day. And, you know, butt sets were nice for finding out what number you're calling from. If you wanted to get into something, let's say, kind of what the statute of limitations in Illinois is, let's say that you wanted to get into the modem at the local Pizza Hut, just to play, just to explore. You could go to their TNI, or like the telephone network, and there's a little telephone box on the outside of the building. You open it up, you clip in, and you dial a number, and it will tell you what number you're calling from. Oh, okay, now we have all these numbers for all these lines coming into the Pizza Hut. I'm going to start hitting all those with my modem and see what I find. Saves a lot of time rather than war dialing the entire exchange. So beige, and these are still, I mean, it's not bad, 70, 80 bucks. But you know, if you're a young freak and you're broke, that's a lot of money. So people get these cheap one-piece $9 Walmart phones, just one piece with a cord, and you set it down and it hangs up. They make beige boxes out of those. You cut the modular plug off, you put a couple of alligator clips on the wires, and now it's basically the same exact unit. You clip those alligator clips in, and you've got a butt set, alignment set. You can use it not only at the outside of a building or a business or a house with the network interface box. You go to a telephone can down at the corner of the street, clip into that. If you're in an office area, you clip into the punch-down blocks, anywhere that you could catch a phone signal. Multiple uses for a beige box, right? You could clip on the line, if you're a jerk, you go to somebody's house, you clip on the line and make a long-distance call. All right, I made this call, this person's getting billed for it. It's kind of crappy. You could just eavesdrop on people. Okay, my ex-girlfriend lives here, and I'm like a creepy jerk, stalker, weirdo. I clip under her line and see who she's talking to. Both things are just crappy. Don't do stuff like that. Hiding your tracks with fraudulent calls. So if you want to, maybe you're one of these people that steals credit cards, you want to order some stuff from company XYZ, go to somebody else's house to order it. That way they do catch that it's a stolen card, they backtrace it. It's going to that house and not yours. You can also use it with a blue box. So you use this beige box, you clip onto a phone line, and now you're going to start blue boxing your calls. If the telco catches on to you and they try and backtrace where this blue box call came from, again, it's going to this house over here. Anybody that ever did something like that would if they weren't complete jerks, they would try and find like an 80-year-old lady, tie into her house. Because when the phone company comes and says, you've been blue boxing, and this wonderful little old lady comes to the door and says, no, I haven't, but would you like some tea and scones? They realize, okay, somebody else is doing it. You're okay, lady. We're not going to stick you at the bill because remember, phone company always gets paid, but they would go after somebody else. And these, like I said, these are hard to come by, and these were pricey back then. These were expensive. Sometimes you'd find a bell truck that was unlocked. Unlocked bell trucks were awesome because they always had manuals. You could spend an hour at an unlocked bell truck in the middle of the night with a camera and just start taking pictures of manuals. Put the manual back, go home, get your film developed, and I have a copy of the important pages out of that manual. not really unlike some of the pictures that we're all taking here today as we hack badges and try and get codes for the capture the con. Same kind of theory, just older and more old school because it is film developed. Usually you wouldn't find something like this in unlocked bell truck. If you did, it was a bonus, but again, at that point, you had to be a criminal because you had to steal it, which, again, if you're a jerk if you do that. Don't be a jerk. So yeah, so beige box. Any questions about beige boxes? I know we're blasting through this all pretty quick, but again, if anybody comes up with any questions after that, hunt me down. Here's an example of a beige box. Everybody's seen these like super cheapo phones. Some of us have owned these things in the past. Absolute garbage. But they work good for doing beige boxing. Sure, they just put some alligator clips on the end and off they go to do nefarious, hackerish things. So I'm going to touch on some famous freaks that use these boxes for good and bad. A lot of people got really interested in phone phreaking in the early 70s. There's the Esquire article that we mentioned. And the title of the article is Secrets of the Little Blue Box. And I do have links here. If it's going to be too small if you want to take pictures of it. If anybody would like, I'll put my contact info back up at the end here. Reach out to me. I'm more than happy to send the slide deck out to folks. Or if you just want to copy the links, I can let you know those as well. So Esquire did an article in 71 that really opened the doors for a lot of people. The LA Times said, well, we can't be outdone by Esquire. We need to run an article. So they did one in 71. The Wall Street Journal in 76 did an article. So there's a lot of coverage. There's a lot of big name publications that were telling people how to do this telephone fraud. So a lot of people were like, this is kind of cool. Some of these people you know. Woz and Jobs. So Steve Wozniak read the article in Esquire. And Woz was very technical. He was a builder guy. Woz was the guy that built stuff and Jobs was the guy that sold stuff. So Woz reads this article and he gets super jazzed. He's like halfway through it. And he calls up Jobs and says, oh my gosh, you got to check out this article. They talk about this thing. I'm pretty sure it's fiction. I'm pretty sure it's a made-up article. But you got to read it. It's so cool. It'd be so awesome if this worked. So they read it and they got excited. They went to the Berkeley Library and they did some reading and they found out that, the article's not made up. These tones actually work. So Woz builds his first blue box. So having trouble making it work. So he gets a hold of John Draper, who's mentioned in the article, the Captain Crunch guy. John goes and visits Steve and says, oh, you're doing it wrong. Let me show you how to do this. Teaches them how to blue box. But at that point, Woz and Jobs are like, this is something big. They start building, like Woz starts just cranking out blue boxes, and Jobs starts selling them on campus to other students. Hey, you want a way to make free phone calls? We'll sell you this box, and we'll teach you how to use it. The sales from their blue boxes gave them the startup capital to start Apple computers. This is where they got the money to build the Apple I. So if it weren't for blue boxing and freaks, none of them would have iPhones or iMacs or iPads or iPods or any iThings. They were so jazzed about it, and some of their actual direct quotes are like Woz says, of all the articles I've ever read in my life, the Esquire article, Secrets of the Little Blue Box, was the one that affected my life the most. If you think about it, that's true, right? Because they read this, they start getting money, they start Apple, and look at these guys now. I mean, Apple is huge. I mean, and it all started because they read an article in a magazine and built the little box that was in it. Jobs says, experiences like that taught us the power of ideas. And that sounds Jobs-like, doesn't it? If we hadn't have had those blue box experiences, there never would have been an Apple computer. So yeah, that's kind of big. If you think about how big Apple is now and how many places Apple is, and the fact that it all started from Woz picking up an article or picking up a magazine and reading an article one night, it's kind of neat to see that transition up. It's been a long day. So the abilities box, they're getting confidence. Hey, we're good electronics. We made this thing. It works. We can do stuff with it. It's cool. We can explore stuff. This is fun. We like this. Gets them all jazzed, and they decided at that point, hey, we can change the world. And they did, which is very cool. And again, Draper worked with Woz in the very beginning of times to kind of teach him the ropes. And they stayed in touch. In fact, Draper ended up working for Apple in between prison stints, writing some software for him, but that's It's a whole other story. We'll get to that. Oh, we're at that. So, no, my apologies. I do have a typo. It's actually John Draper. I don't know how Carl got in there. It's bizarre. So he goes by Captain Crunch because, again, he was the individual that discovered that the whistle would blow 2,600 hertz. You could blue box with it. He was in the Air Force. He was stationed up in Alaska. I've never been to Alaska, but I'm assuming there's not a whole lot to do in Alaska. So John had a lot of free time on his hands. He would get like old Air Force radios and would tweak them and build them up and make things. He made his own radio stations. He started teaching other servicemen that he was stationed with how to make free calls from Alaska. Because back then it was expensive to call from Alaska back down to the mainland because the telephone company always gets paid. There's a blind individual named Denny Teresi. It turns out that there was a large group of blind freaks back then. Denny contacts John and says, hey, we want you to build this electronic box for us. And it's going to generate these weird tones. Build this. So John built them a blue box. Then he found, after building the blue box and learning about the tones, he found out about the whistle. The Esquire article, he was interviewed, and they mentioned his name in the article. As a result, in 1972, he was arrested for toll fraud, because the telephone company always gets paid, and he was sentenced to 5 years probation. Easy peasy, right? Well, not really, not for John. He meets Steve, teaches Woz how to box. Woz is like, oh, you're a cool guy, I like you. You want to come work for Apple? So John said, yeah. He went to work for Apple and wrote Easy Writer, which is like an early word processor. Never got paid what he was supposed to, and they had kind of a falling out. He also wanted to make Charlie boxes for the Apple. It would allow you, it's kind of a modem that would allow you to call Watts lines. Watts lines were like 800 numbers. They're called inbound Watts. And it would be a way to talk, to have your computer talk to these Watts lines. At that point in time, Woz and Jobs like, modems? Yeah, no, those aren't really cool. No one's really going to like talking to other computers that much. We're not too worried about that. And a couple of years later, Draper sold his Charlie Box idea to another company, and now it's used in like voicemail systems and all kinds of stuff. Again, he didn't get credit for it. He sold the idea and they took it. He couldn't stop boxing though. Couldn't stop exploring the phone system. So he continued to explore and continued to get caught. So he served prison sentences in 1976 and 1978, both times for toll fraud. He's very well known. All the freaks knew who Captain Crunch was. They would call him in the middle of the night just to talk to him. He was eccentric, always has been kind of eccentric. Often felt he was being watched. People would call him up, and his first question, is this like being traced? Who are you? Where are you calling from? Why'd you call me? Just very paranoid. He would then do like strange conversations with some of the people that called him. Recently, he's been accused of some stuff. Hasn't been convicted, but there are enough accusations that he lives in the same town I do. I don't want to meet him. So he claims that he and two other freaks could bring down all phone services in the entire U.S. He, like a lot of like kind of out there theories and ideas. Some people are like, yeah, maybe, but it'd take a lot more than two other freaks. But a large group could drop all the phone systems, but it'd be more than 3 people. And basically, they would just stack all the trunks and busy out all the trunks in the whole U.S. But it would take a lot of people to do that. It brings us to Joe. Joe Ingressia Jr. He's also known as Whistler. Anybody seen the movie Sneakers with Robert Redford? In the movie Sneakers, there was a whistler. That character was based off of Joe Ingressia loosely. Joe was born blind, but he had perfect pitch. He could whistle any note perfectly. He was really interested in the telephone. He was blind. He was left with a babysitter. His dad had left when he was, I think before he was even born. He was raised just by his mom. She had to work full time to be able to take care of them both. So he was just left alone with his babysitter that really didn't give a crap about him. Just, sit over there and entertain yourself, So he would do that. He would start calling people at like 4 years old. He'd start playing on the phone. He'd call like time and temperature numbers just to hear people, just to have some sort of interaction with something, because although he's blind, so he's lost one sense. He wanted that contact, and he wasn't getting it from humans. So let's play with the phone. The phone will at least talk to me. I can call random people and talk to them. At 5 years old, he figured out how to switch trick dial. Switch trick dialing on On an older phone that has like a handset that you actually hang up on the receiver, there's two buttons that come up that the handset pushes down when you hang up. You can take those and tap them and dial a phone number. It's pulse styling, basically, is what it is. Even if your phone is set to tone, pulse will still work. So if you want to dial a 3, you'd just be like, a 5 would be, he figured out he could dial the phone that way. So he started playing that. But then at 7, so he's calling these time and temperature numbers. He's 7 years old, he's listening to these numbers. Well, at this point, they're starting to get kind of old. So he whistles to himself. He's listening. He happens to whistle at 2600 hertz tone and the recording stops. He's like, that's weird. He hangs it up and he calls it back. Mind you, this is a 7-year-old kid. The guy was a genius, had an IQ, I think, of like 172. He was a smart dude. So he calls it back. He's like, oh, the recording's fine now. Well, what was I doing? How did I make that happen? All I was doing was whistling this song. Recording goes dead. Joe's like, oh, I'm on to something. If I whistle this song, why? And then he calls up the phone company and says, hey, so I called this number and I was whistling this song and it made the line drop. And I noticed that when I whistled this song, it was like the E above middle C on a piano. He had a friendly lineman that said, oh yeah, that's a 2600 hertz tone. That's going to drop the tandem and then re-seize it, and And Joe said, well, that's really cool. Can I come down and get a tour of the phone company and see how this works in person? And the guy's like, okay, ma'am, you can make an appointment with our business office. And Joe says, oh, I'm not a lady. I'm a 7-year-old boy named Joe, and I'm blind, and I want to learn about phones. Well, this lineman's like, this is a joke, so much pranking me, Okay, Joe, you can go to the phone. And so Joe went down to the phone company, took the city bus with his babysitter, and off they went. Got a tour of the central office. He was blind, so he's feeling all these things to kind of understand how they work. And that helped drive that interest in the phone company that Joe had. So he became very well known. People would call him nightly, like multiple freaks would call him every night just to say, Joe, it's so cool to meet you. This is an honor, it's a privilege, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of like you're walking to the hotel lobby and you see, you see some famous security person that and you're like, I gotta go shake his hand. Oh, look, it's Jason Street, I gotta get a hug. Things like that. That's kind of how Joe was. People would call him up. And that was his form of communicating with the outside world. That was how he just kept himself entertained. He went to school down in the University of South Florida, and everybody liked him because of his phone phreaking ability, right? So he's like, that's where some of my self-worth and my value comes from. I'm going to help all my fellow students get free phone calls. He starts helping them get free calls, and he gets busted. Toll fraud. Doesn't do any, I think he's had a couple of days where they say the judge gets out. He'd been wanting to get a job at AT&T. AT&T's like, you got busted, we're not hiring you. So he went to work for a small telco in Memphis and loved it. Did that for a number of years. Then moved to Minneapolis. He had some emotional stuff going on. I mean, we all do, who doesn't, right? But he wanted to be a 5-year-old kid again. That was a happy time in his life for him. He was playing with the phone system, he hadn't been busted. And so he declared himself to be 5 and changed his name to Joy Bubbles. Some people know him as Joy Bubbles, some know him as Whistler, some know him as Joe. And he ended up dying of congestive heart failure in Minneapolis as a kid. Lived out the end of his life as a child and enjoyed it. So don't you go to sleep again. All right, so those are a couple of the famous people that kind of got phreaking where it was a couple of years ago. So some cool numbers that we used to play with. Loops. So a loop is a telephone company test number. There's 2 sides to a loop, a high side and a low side. You call one side, you hear a tone. You call the other side, you hear nothing. When you call these 2 sides, you get connected to whoever's on the other side. So freaks should use this. A lot of these loops, because they're a test number, didn't build. Even though it was in some weird odd area code, you'd call and it would be a non-supervised number, like the billing wouldn't kick in. So if I wanted to talk to my friend Dave, who is in, San Francisco, and I'm in New York, none of us wants to pay for that call. Phone company always gets paid unless it's the phone company's own number. So we would call a loop number. We'd be connected, we could talk for free, it wouldn't cost us anything. Loops still exist. You can still find loops in certain exchanges. And we'll talk about some of those in a second here. There's also ANAC and ANI. ANI is what your caller ID runs off of, announces the number that you're calling from. ANAC is the same type of thing, but it's a more base level. It's much harder to spoof ANAC than ANI. ANI can spoof really. They make phones that'll spoof ANI for you. ANAC still works. So if you're ever at a phone, and you can use this not only for nefarious phreaking purposes, but if you're installing some phone lines at work and you're punching stuff down, you're like, I don't remember what line this is. Plug into it with a butt set or something, and call an ANAC number, and it'll read the number back to you that you're calling from. Super handy. Or if you're trying to hack the local Pizza Hut and you're in their telephone network box, call an ANAC number if you want to find out what the phone numbers are so you can explore them with your modem later. MCI runs a toll-free ANAC, and it's super easy to remember. It's 800-444-4444. Kind of hard to forget. It's almost like Cloudflare's 1.1.1.1 or 8.8.8.8. Albuquerque, New Mexico has one. Edgerton, Wisconsin has one. Now with the Edgerton number, if you call that number, it will read back your number. It will not give you the MPA or the area code. But if you know like where you're at when you're calling it, you kind of know what the area code is theoretically. So then there's call diverters. You can call a diverter number, usually an 800 number. Get the other party to answer. Hello, Xerox, and you can say, oh, I'm sorry, I thought I was calling Taco Bell, wrong number, my bad. Okay, they hang up. You don't hang up, you hang out. After about a minute, that line resets. You get a dial tone, and that's the diverter dial tone. You now have a dial tone off their system. So the phone company sees that you dialed an 800 number. They're not going to bill you for that. You then call from there to Singapore. Phone company always gets paid. That company pays for that call to Singapore. CNA. CNA is not good. It's customer name and address. And CNA was a number that you could call, and you could say, yeah, this is Bill from the central office over in 312, and I need a CNA on this phone number. And you give them a phone number. They would tell you that customer's name and that customer's address. So it was used as an early form of doxing back in the day. If you had a phone number for somebody, you had their name, you had their address. Super easy. And then there's various cool exchanges. 958 and 959. And most area codes, those are reserved as telephone text exchanges. So we're, 414 today, I guess. So if you dial 414 and 958 and you start hunting through numbers in there, you might find some interesting numbers that the telephone company uses for testing. Loops will be in a 958, 959 typically. CNA will typically be in a 958, 959. A lot of times you'll find ANAC and ANI in that 958, 959. And then there's weird exchanges. This is part of an urban legend, kind of. I don't know how true it is. I've never been able to verify it myself because I don't have the number and I really don't want to find the number. But there's an exchange, 840, and it worked in several different area codes. And it was a specific number after the 840. It was only one or two numbers in that entire 840 dialing range that actually reached somebody. And it turned out it was a government installation. And somebody stumbled across it, said, called it up. This lady answers, operator. He said, yeah, what number did I call? She said, what number did you dial? Oh, well, I dialed blah, blah, blah. She said, that's not this number. Click. Well, that's interesting. What is this? What did they find? Keeps calling it. Here's an uncle that works with the intelligence community. Gives it a number, goes, I can't figure out what this is, uncle. What is this? His uncle comes back a couple of days later. Don't ever call that number again. Forget you even knew that number. Apparently, it was a facility where the president goes in the event of a large-scale threat, basically like the president's bomb shelter. Again, don't know how true that is, but if you're bored and you want to play with a phone number, might be one you want to play with, might be one you want to avoid. So we're doing on time. Okay, we got a few minutes here. Quick story time. I'm just going to give you a couple of stories. Restaurants and switch hooking. So before I was an IT guy, many moons ago, I was a cook. Worked in restaurants, high-end executive restaurants, and cooked. At the front of the house, I always had a phone. People could call in and make reservations. There was no dial on, no buttons, no dial. It was an inbound phone only. They didn't want people making calls. The waitresses would get bored. They always wanted to call out. Oh, I need to call my boyfriend. I'm running late. I know how to switch hook. So I would teach the waitresses how to switch. I was the most popular cook. Usually waitresses and cooks don't get along well. I was the most popular cook there. Awesome. angry operators. If you're blue boxing a call, or I'm sorry, if you're red boxing a call and you hit the quarters too fast, or you hit them in too much of a pattern sequence, you have to make it believable that you're putting quarters in. Sometimes you get a live operator, Put your little toy away, put money in the phone, or I'm calling security. Always entertaining to mess with them for a little bit because you knew that it was going to take call security a while to get to that payphone you were at. By the time they got there, you're long gone. I'm going to skip free switch. I'm going to say that for last. Trashing. Freaks used to trash all the time, which is exactly what it sounds like. You go to a dumpster and you jump in. You try to avoid the bags that look like they came from the lunchroom because those are pretty gross. But usually phone company trash is pretty clean. It's usually papers. And there are a lot of interesting papers you can find. You can find old bell manuals that had all kinds of technical information, which was great. You read through those, learn about the phone company. One time we hit a local telco. They're also an ISP. They had DSL back in '95, which was awesome. I was like a block from the CO. I had the fastest internet in town. I was beta testing it for them. It's awesome. We found a printout of all the usernames and passwords for every shell account on their network. Nicely printed out, folded up neatly on tractor feed paper. So we played with that a little bit and then called them, hey, you guys realize you threw this away? You should change all your passwords. Same telco, we would dial to the free switches. We would dial in and switch at this telephone company. There was a modem port on that switch for diagnostic purposes. We found that number when we were war dialing. We would dial in, we would just watch switch traffic all day. And now, it was entertaining. We were bored, we were kids, what else are we going to do? So the phone company realized that we were dialing into their switch and watching stuff. We didn't do any damage. We were curious. We were exploring. We weren't criminals. We weren't trying to hurt the phone company. We wanted to learn how it worked. They called me up one day. Brad, we see you guys have been in our switch. Uh-oh. Yeah? Well, you kids have an interest in the phone company, huh? Like, well, yeah, we want to know how the phone systems work. I mean, that's cool, we like it. And we just upgraded a switch, and we have an extra switch here. Would you kids like it to play with? Yes, please. But yeah, we have a GTD 120A switch. We have all the software for it. It's filled with all the line cards. Just come pick it up. I'm like, let me get a truck. We'll be there in half an hour. And I'm calling my buddies, dude, we got to get a truck. Where are we going to truck? I don't care, steal one. We're getting a switch. And we got a full phone switch. We rolled it into one of our basements and set up our own little mini PBX system off. And it was awesome. It was so cool to learn from and go through the software. I wonder what happens if we pull this line card out in the middle of a call. Oh, okay. It was super cool. So, it's like anything, right? Phreaking can be used for good, it can be used for evil, it can be used to learn and to explore, to expand your knowledge, or it can be used to do bad things. So the key is, I guess, use the good things. Phreaking is still a thing. It's just changed, but it's still out there. So this is basically just a historical talk about how we used to play with the phone company and the fun that we had with it. So in closing, if you'd like a copy of the deck or any of the links or anything from this, that's still really small. If anybody wants to run up and just take a picture of that if they want, cool. Otherwise, again, I'm over in the Hacker History Village. Swing by, say hi. We have a couple of paper tapes if you want for your badge. We have, I've got a speaker, capture the con card for 25 points if you want. Does anybody have any questions, comments, stories of your own, anything that you'd like to contribute? This is a social talk. I'm more than happy if anybody has anything. Yeah.
So did you, when an angry operator contacted you and needed help, did you ever sit there just watch them roll in to actually see if anybody came?
No, we weren't that brave.
Okay.
No, I was afraid of cat. And it would have taken a long time because this town was in the middle of nowhere. So we just move on to a new payphone, continue our hiking, dial our quarters a little slower, but yeah. So, any other questions? All right, hey, thank you everybody for coming out and coming to the talk. I appreciate it.